everyone. We're now going to open the Q&A session for today's presenters. We have to present with us Lianna Tullis-Robinson, Alex Giarretta, Daniel Oliver, and Luke Johnson. Unfortunately, Minda Bowling, Aiden Kunju, and Zach Daly couldn't make it to our live Q&A. So if you have any questions for them, please type it out using the Q&A function. And please include your email address so we can send it to them and they can follow up with you on their own time. So we'll begin our Q&A session. So my first question I have here will be for Lianna. So the question is, how do you see the role of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, competencies in upholding our ethical responsibilities, and fusing the two treatment models you are investigating?
Oh, so how do I see them? Well, I believe that they exist on a spectrum, right? Because I think in some senses, looking at psychedelic healing models and traditional psychotherapy models have some tension between them, and that they don't fuse seamlessly. And I think that this is showcased by there being a lack of representation of BIPOC folks in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So I think in the ways that I see it, I think that they could be a good fit, but I think the piece that matters is how to optimize the space for people of color instead of seeing it as a one size fits all. So I think that particularly in the research that I am doing when I am interviewing BIPOC folks about their perceptions of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, I'll be interviewing them in groups with other people who share racial and ethnic identity. And so this is going to reveal similarities, right? Perhaps in one group of Black and African Americans, but we can also look at intergroup differences. And so when we look at those differences, I think that those nuanced details are going to show us how we can optimize the space. So I do think that we can have the two treatment models fit together, but it will take additional research to figure out how we can enhance it specifically for certain populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lianna. Okay, so the next question we have for you, qualitative data and lived experience is often lacking in traditional research. How do you envision your dissertation research by conducting interviews may bring more insight to treatment outcomes with psychedelic-assisted therapy, or better inform the design of clinical trials for marginalized communities?
That's a brilliant question. One thing about qualitative research that makes my heart sing is the story. And I think that the strength of having your voice also show up in clinical research is very important because storytelling is also a principle in psychedelics, right? It's a principle in psychedelic healing. This is how we learn about how to heal ancestrally through the stories that we tell in our communities. And so I think quantitative research is important, but in similar manners, qualitative research is very significant because you get to hear the participant's voice. And so I think that you can also take more, you could take on more behavioral cues as well, and you can gain data in that way. So I think that qualitative research in equal measure is just as important as quantitative data. And I think that to paint that picture is also very significant because different people, different populations who share different cultural relevances to psychedelics have different stories to share.
Thank you, Lianna.
Thank you.
My next question is for Alex. So the question is, how were dosing ranges decided for the design of the study you had mentioned? Are there other studies that have used low doses like as the control condition? And what is the potential relevance to blinding and expectancy effects dependent on that dose?
That's a good question. So, all of the dosing, like regimen stuff, was kind of just taken from previous studies. There was one I remember where it was like the 1 milligram dose, which is like the control dose, against that 25 milligram high dose. And it's basically like it's kind of hard to have a control in a lot of these studies just because when you take like a high dose of a psychedelic, you know that you're on a psychedelic. Um, so like part of the design that I had talked about in my presentation, where you kind of are trying to like deceive people since you're so like your brain is so suggestible going into any sort of therapy with a psychedelic drug and then during the therapy. The idea is that by telling someone you're receiving a higher dose, maybe then they'll kind of perceive the effects of a low dose as being more similar to a higher dose so that when we go and we compare like what's the high dose versus the low dose, those low dose people hopefully have less bias because that deception will kind of make up for the fact that they are receiving a lower dose, if that explains.
It does. Thank you, Alex. So another question we have for you. So since this is an interdisciplinary conference, what is the wildest or most far out field, topic, technique, or design you see incorporating in your research moving forward? And are there any such collaborations you're looking forward to making?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I honestly, hmm, I mean the whole like this whole project was kind of just like a hypothetical research design trial. So part of like the interdisciplinary thing for me, I guess, like if I were to like relate it at all, I know that's like asking about like the wildest like collaboration or something. Um, but like I'm studying pharmacy right now. And so it's kind of like I'm kind of interested in like finding a place for the pharmacist in like this psychedelic world because there's a lot more work to be done still. In terms of collaboration, uh, and like how I would design a trial going forward, I'm not sure. I could say that my mentor, uh, James, had a very interesting role as curating playlists for psychedelic trials. And I think that that's kind of an interesting aspect of design that's maybe not necessarily overlooked, but not really, kind of focused on. And I think that like curating a good space to take these substances and then receive therapy, I think it would be interesting to explore kind of those like auxiliary like uh, you know, uh, things that kind of are dictating the experience. So I think it would be fun to maybe consult someone who knows like, a lot about music and would be able to give me a playlist that would make people feel good while they're on psilocybin.
Thank you, Alex. The next question I have is going to be for Luke. So the question is, if psychedelics have the potential to produce profound changes around beliefs, what are the potential harms, benefits of this alteration? And how is this subjective change over time being captured in research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think and so far as harms go, we can look to historical examples. Um, so I guess one extreme would be like Charles Manson and his followers in the 60s and there's been a number of different cults and whatnot that have used psychedelics sort of as a way to I guess capture the minds is one way to put it of their followers. So putting people into these states of suggestibility and psychological flexibility, people can obviously go through sort of rapid changes and get sort of carried away with ideologies and sort of extreme worldviews. So that's one concern. I think obviously bringing psychedelics into controlled clinical settings, those sort of things are less likely to occur. But it's obviously something to keep in mind, putting people into very suggestible states. You want to have clear goals and aims and obviously try to control for things like that. But on the other end of things, when people have very sort of dysfunctional beliefs that are causing, a lot of their psychological issues, that is where we see the great potential that my talk was sort of focused on, and sort of creating the opportunity for breakthroughs and progress with psychiatric conditions and different sort of states of psychological suffering. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. Any thoughts on like how to capture this with research? I know you had mentioned the questionnaire, so I'm curious if it is if it relates to that at all, or like how could we best capture this subjective change?
Sure. Yeah, I think another thing too, which I forget which, I think Aiden Stott got to, is focusing more on the subjective side of things, and not just relying on surveys to do that. So I think collecting more just naturalistic sort of trip reports, I guess, that's one way to describe them. Just getting people to write about their experiences and doing more qualitative research on that sort of first person experience report to better understand the intricacies of people's experiences, and not only relying on surveys, which kind of have their assumptions and sort of limitations, but looking more to, obviously, with different sort of language models and machine learning techniques, being able to learn from subjective reports has become a lot more accessible in this day and age. So I think that'll be a big thing in the future as well.
All right, so we have one last question for you, Luke. So this is from David F. Given that some psychedelics tend to elicit non-naturalistic metaphysical hallucinations and the necessarily spiritual nature of treatments like ayahuasca, is the epistemic risk for atheist participants too great? And should classical psychedelics be de-emphasized in secular Western medicine in favor of psychoplastogens and other substances without the trip?
So I guess if I understand the question correctly, are they sort of trying to, I guess they're trying to address the risk of like religious belief change? Is that sort of what the question is getting at? I just want to make sure
I'm gonna copy the question into the chat for
yeah,
you.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
I mean, I guess to start to answer it somewhat, I do think that if these sort of psychoplastogens are successfully, developed and seem to be effective, they're probably more likely for people to be willing to take for psychiatric conditions. And I think that, psychedelics might become more popular within sort of a spiritual religious context. We're already seeing obviously a lot of different sort of psychedelic churches pop up, and I think that's a great thing. Obviously, there's a long history of psychedelic use within human culture that is kind of obviously got pushed to the wayside due to the war on drugs. So I think the sort of resurgence of that is awesome. Obviously, there's a need to respect that history and learn from those sort of that long history of indigenous use is very important. Let me just quickly read this as well to make sure I'm. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what they mean by the epistemic risk for atheist participants. Obviously, I think there's a risk for people to have potentially scary experiences or sort of existentially sort of existential experiences. But I think within the right context, people can sort of become comfortable and sort of work through any sort of difficult experiences and come to terms with what those mean to them. So I guess that's all I have to say on that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. My next question is going to be for Dan. So the question is, with MDMA being a synthetic substance that may be swept up by pharmaceutical companies and sold at high cost, how can we address greater access to MDMA treatment for substance use disorders?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's particularly relevant post FDA advisory panel decision because, there's now news coming out that, Lykos Therapeutics was trying to actually patent specific doses of MDMA. And I would actually refer you to a really good organization that did a talk for IP or came and gave a talk for IPN called Porta Sophia. And what they do is they are kind of a watchdog group for patent applications and specifically patent applications for like new psychedelic drugs or entactogens and pathogens, what have you. And some of the patent applications have been quite ridiculous, which is funny, but also cause for concern. Like one was literally like having music in conjunction with a psychedelic drug. That's not specific enough nor novel enough to be patentable. And so they do something called like prior art, where they find like prior evidence of something being practiced as a way to do that. So I think that's sort of keeping up to date on the patents of things is quite important. There are some DMT analogs, I forgot the name specifically, that have that the DEA was trying to sort of make illegal, and there was significant researcher pushback. So I think within, and I can, if you want to email me, I can find it for you, but I just can't bring it to mind immediately. So I think on the regulatory side of things, I think, just sort of keeping corporate interests in check in terms of like making sure they don't overstep with their patent applications is incredibly important. In terms of access, I think that, we have a lot of, and this is going to be a bit of a broad answer, but we have a lot of repairing to do after the war on drugs, and frankly, just like very myopic and black and white, like binary forms of drug education with regards to like drug safety, like, DARE and plenty of other like scare tactic programs. And, a great example of this is, and so I think that it's really important to stress that, accessibility to these drugs is super important for treatments. But we're going to have to scale like latent public, but decriminalization matters too. And we're going to need to be able to scale like latent public knowledge with like public policy that allows for access. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I think that like you don't want to go completely in the recreational route without without some regulation. Otherwise, you have a repeat of what's happened with some of the issues in the recreational cannabis industry with some extractive capitalism occurring in the global south, as well as just a lot of strains becoming more and more and more potent, several times as potent as what was sold, back in the 70s and 80s. So I think, finding that, but I think the balance exists somewhere in between, not having completely gatekept medicalization, but expanding access. I think another thing too is that would be interesting, and I think it's undecided yet, is being able to artificially shorten some of the experiences on these drugs just for cost-effective purposes. Obviously we want sliding scale access, but like it's very cost intensive to have a clinician sit with you for 6 to 12 hours. And that's part of the reason a lot of the research right now has been focused more on psilocybin than LSD. And if you can artificially shorten or artificially terminate early on some of the subjective effects of some of these drugs, you could potentially, I think, expand access to a lot of these drugs.
Thank you, Daniel. So for the last question we have for you, this person asks, oftentimes people relate addictions to having an addictive personality. What are your thoughts on MDMA helping people with addictions with personality change? And they also said you gave a fantastic presentation.
First of all, thanks. I was definitely nervous when I was giving it, but I'm glad that some people enjoyed it. So I guess, can you state that question one more time in terms of addictive personality and what change?
What are your thoughts on MDMA helping people with addictions with personality change?
Personality change. Okay. I think that addiction has a lot of factors, like biopsychosocial thrown around a bunch, but there's, various models that try to capture it, like the stress diathesis model is one. And, you can kind of think of like, I think vulnerability to addiction is sort of like a dynamic model that hinges on like what we tend to refer to as these three factors. In terms of like personality change, I think for addiction specifically, like it can be like if I were to explain this to like someone like it's kind of like you talk to someone, some people who have done like fentanyl or heroin, and you hear sentiments along the line of like nothing ever feels as good again, or like nothing ever feels that good. And I think that we are sort of there is some, if you like refer to Luke's talk, like prediction error processing in the brain that makes us sort of like that drives like our decision making and our world building, and sort of we try to ideally maximize the reward that we get from our decisions through these types of prediction errors. And so when you have a very addictive substance, I think that you can develop a very strong attachment to that, and that can sort of displace the other relationships that you have in your life. In terms of personality specifically, I don't know that I am able to characterize that clinically, but I think that's the best answer I can give for that.
Thank you, Dan. So the next question I have will be for all of the presenters today. So the question is, what do you hope the future of the field looks like? What would you hope for?
I can talk, I guess. Generally speaking, I just think that like, it's been really interesting. I was at Horizons recently, and I was looking at a lot, there's a lot of perspectives for all 3 of the days. And there's noticeable contrast between all of them. I mean, the first day you have like venture capital, and it's like, people wanting to sort of like eliminate all the subjective effects of the drugs and like get it to work as they, it's like a clear like sort of direction towards like wanting to do what SSRIs couldn't fully. And the second day is like, was research, and the third day was just general stuff. And there was a lot of talk about specifically like indigenous reciprocity. And I think one of the, it's tough to like translate good clinical practice from like social customs from a completely different kind of world. There's going to be overlap, but those kinds of dialogues, I think, like, are going to be challenging, but that's partially why they need to happen more. I think that more specifically, one of the, I guess, like, and I can't speak on it too much, but one of the more broad advantages to like, these sort of more so native settings from which like these substances have been used is that there's been like hundreds of years for which like safe practices to embed themselves in the cultural practices themselves. And I think that, we're still very much in the early stages of that in terms of like Western culture and medicine and using that in terms of that. So I hope that like, going back to the, like my prior comment, like the recreational use is fine. I mean, I'm of the right to consciousness party kind of, or I support that kind of thing. And I'm quite supportive of like decriminalization, but I think that there needs to be some sort of framework that develops on a societal level or on more of a macro level concerning just like latent public knowledge of these substances, and how to like use them responsibly. But that's pretty much, yeah.
Hi, I can go next. I have a lot of hopes, for the future when it comes to psychedelic science and research. But there are a couple of factors that I think need to be taken into consideration. I do appreciate psychedelic interventions with psychotherapy because it creates an additional option, right? Especially for folks who are in therapy and they feel like they're just running into a brick wall. And there are other things, other interventions, maybe like electroconvulsive therapy for people with treatment-resistant depression that they really don't want to try, and that there are a lot of negative side effects that come with that. So, my hope is that there continues to be an openness for psychedelic intervention, to be seen as honorable, to enhance traditional psychotherapy. Of course, my other hopes are that we will continue representation, of people of color. And this is not just in participants, but who are the researchers, who are conducting the studies, who are the professors, who are teaching these principles, who are leading these certificate programs, right? And so I think that that's an additional hope that I have, for us to increase representation. But I think as well, maybe the last point that I will make is I think that there needs to be an introduction of exclusivity in this field, because I think that practicing as a clinician, a researcher, even being a client, in psychedelic psychotherapy is not for everyone. That's why it's an option. So I think that we shouldn't shy away from seeing it as an exclusive practice. And that even though people have had life-changing experiences themselves, that doesn't necessitate that they would be a fantastic guide, or a facilitator or a researcher or anything like that. You can have a beautiful experience, but hold on to that for your own self. And perhaps even spread the word with loved ones or other people that you have to speak with on it. But I think that we could continue to look at psychedelic science and research as exclusive and not for everyone. But that doesn't mean that we cannot welcome everyone, into the space if they feel like it can support and serve them. And perhaps the last thing that I will say too is that I think, speaking as a clinician, like as a psychotherapist, one hope that I have is that we can take psychotherapy out of the clinical room, that we can take it out of, like I have my therapy room, you come in here, perhaps you sit in a chair and we administer, a psychedelic for you. My hope is that perhaps there could be additional avenues in independent contract work for psychotherapists to join on retreat centers or to take themselves more so into the community rather than always having clients come to us. I think that that can increase accessibility. Thank you.
I think I'd just like to see for research to become easier to do, and be less like impeded by like governmental restrictions and rules, because there's just like a lack of data. I think just due to the fact that it's been so hard to research a lot of these compounds. And my hope is that, like in the interest of just making a lot of money, we don't move too quickly and kind of forego the research that is necessary to, prove that these can be administered, like these drugs can be administered at like, a large scale. Because, in the past, like when you could just buy LSD from a pharmaceutical company and like, and administer it to patients like with no, obviously that's, the floodgates are not going to be open that much, but I think it's just important that more people are, kind of getting their hands in the field of psychedelics and kind of like showing the world that there's important work to be done still, and that there's a lot of important benefits to derive uh, from these compounds.
I think one thing I would like to see in the future of psychedelics would be a more personalized approach, as well as an introduction of more nuance and consideration of all the variables that go into a psychedelic experience. So I think a lot of the earlier studies had very sort of simple approaches, a lot of the same models and how drugs are administered, and sort of very limited sort of scope and the way the therapy is practiced. So this kind of goes a bit to Lianna's point, trying new models, trying to innovate on how psychedelics can work best, whether that be group therapy or out of a clinical setting, or maybe some sort of model that hasn't even been explored yet. And also what works best for the patient, whether that be what sort of particular what they're bringing to the table, what they're struggling with, what diagnosis they have. Just bringing more nuance, more personalization, and more innovation to the field is what I would like to see. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dan, Lianna, Alex, Luke. And thank you to our audience for submitting your questions. We're going to now move into the closing ceremony, the moment you've all been waiting for. And so today we have the honor of having Devon Phillips, Community and Partnerships Officer for MAPS, to officiate our awards ceremony. Please take it away, Devon.
What's up, y'all? Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. I literally sprinted here from the airport. My flight was delayed, and I was like, I'm not missing this. So took that JFK to Brooklyn sprint, essentially. But I'm super happy to be here. It's been a really awesome conversation. And yeah, I get to do the honors of giving you great people these awards. So let me get started. Should I pull the slides up on my side? Is that how we're going to do this? I'll say that's a yes. Cool. So thank you, Bianca. And congratulations to you all for completing the 4th annual PsychedelX conference. Over the past 3 days, you had the opportunity to hear incredible stories, perspectives, and ideas from rising scholars and leaders across the psychedelic ecosystem. But before we announce our winners, I just want to give a recognition to everyone who made this conference possible. And also, before I do this, all y'all have incredibly beautiful names. Please don't take my terrible English and maybe mispronouncing some as a discredit of any of these beautiful people. So if I mess it up, as it's my English, I'm sorry prior. We have our the talk coaches who mentioned this year, who mentored this year's cohort and who are directly responsible for shaping all the talks you've seen. We have Victor Esiro, Uma Chatterjee, Elena Jaster, Maya Seal, I can't see this one because of the screen, James Hasabi, Ewore Leon, Hannah Hilgeman, Alizia Balash, and Mary Bakshieva. The professional judges who took time out of their busy schedules to provide valuable feedback to our finalists. Dr. Charles Nichols, Associate Professor of Pharmacology, Louisiana State University. Dr. Joshua Siegel, Co-Director of Program and Psychedelic Research, Washington University School of Medicine, St. Louis. Neil Lusitin, Film and Television Editor, How to Change Your Mind. And Victor Cabral, good friend of mine. Hey, Victor. Assistant Director of Community Care, Naropa Center for Psychedelic Studies. It's a great, great group of people here. We also want to give thanks to our PsychedelX leadership team, who selflessly volunteered countless hours over the past year in service of IPN's mission. If it weren't for these passion and drive, if it wasn't for their passion and drive, this conference would not be possible. We have Aaron Nyhart, Director of PsychedelX, Bianca Watt, Participant Coordinator, Maya Farella, Talk Coach Coordinator, Maya Ibrahim, Conference, Logan Rifi, sorry, PsychedelX Assistant, Shida Shidani, PsychedelX Assistant, Mary Bakshieva, I'm assuming that says Program Coordinator, Kat Boyle, Media Liaison, Justin Cornetta, Fundraising Coordinator, Stephen Wong, Partnership Coordinator, and a dear coworker here at MAPS. He's currently at a music festival right now, so I hope he's having a really good time. Daria Digalskaya, Strategic Coordinator, and Jeff Nickel, Initiatives Coordinator. So thank you to all these people. Again, this is a great leadership team and a great group of people who've made these conversations possible. And next, I can give a shout out to MAPS. I feel weird giving a shout out to MAPS, but give a shout out to organization MAPS for being able to sponsor these things. I can't tell you how much and how excited we are to be able to do this. We're a psychedelic nonprofit, been around since 1986. We've been helping pioneer the industry by advancing research, shifting culture, and changing policy. And we do some really exciting things, but like the community is the most exciting part. And it's an honor to be able to be here. Hearing these last 5 minutes or so, I heard the word, one thing I'd like to see. And I think the dopest part is y'all are the ones building that. We will see that, whether it's the next 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 30 years, it's a young, quote unquote, industry. I hate even using that term, but being able to be here early and invest in y'all and sponsor this is just really heartwarming. It's really awesome to see the changes in people's lives you're going to be bringing over the next couple of decades. So we really appreciate y'all having us, and any way we can help in the future, we'd like to be those types of partners. Also want to give shout outs to our silver sponsor, the Community Grant Program Source Research Foundation, the Transdisciplinary Center for Research in Psychoactive Substances. I also love how all psychedelic organizations have to have these long names. It just comes with the territory. And the Philadelphia Conference, October 3rd to 6th in Philadelphia, Conference on Transdisciplinary Frontiers of Psychedelic Studies. So those are all the shout outs. And now the moment we have been waiting for. So our first runner-up for the 2024 Psychedelic Awards is Foxy Malik Smith Thompson on Soft Focus, Transpersonal Growth for Society through CAIM. I can't hear the applause, so let's give some applause for it. There it is. I see cold applause. I'm hearing you artists yelling in the background right now. Our next runner-up, good job, Foxy. This is awesome. Our next runner-up is Jessica Meisman, The Temple at Burning Man, a model for psychedelic navigation. Great job, Jessica. I've had some really transformational times at the Temple at Burning Man, so I love this. Our next runner-up is Daniel Oliver with MDMA-assisted therapy for alcohol addiction, research to date and potential insights. I've heard some pretty good things about MDMA, so hope this is a good one too. And then now, our third place winner is Javier Jimenez with The Molecule Within, a telescience journey into mammalian DMT. Good job, Javier. Second place, Victor Hernandez with Psychedelic Explorations, harnessing AI for neuroscience research. Great job, Victor. And last but not least, our first place winner is Lianna Tullis-Robinson. Where are my people at? The ethical responsibility to optimize psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy for BIPOC folks. Congratulations, Lianna. This is an incredibly important topic. I'm sure you're doing impactful work. And yeah, hope you can celebrate your win here. So congratulations to all runner-ups and winners, and keep on doing the hard work. I didn't even introduce what I do. Yeah, I'm the partnership officer at MAPS. I hope one day our paths cross. Again, my email is devon@maps.org. If there's anything I want to dive into, any way that we can help conversation, you know, we're learners. There's a lot in space that there's holes at, there's gray area, there's places that we want to learn at MAPS, and y'all are the future. And, you know, we need help. And so we'd love to hear from y'all, even if it's just criticism, if it's something good. Either way, I would love to hear y'all's voices and figure out a way we can make this a really safe and inclusive and better space. And that is all. So again, congratulations to all our winners, and really thank y'all for having us. We will also be giving out one more award. So if you please go to the PsychedelX YouTube channel linked here to see all of this year's talks. The video with the most views by the end of next weekend will be awarded a People's Choice Award. So if you'd like to talk, please share with your friends and family. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Back to you, Bianca.
Thank you so much, Devon. We appreciate you being here. And so with that, PsychedelX 2024 is officially over. I posted the link to our YouTube page in the chat so you can go back and see the presentations. Thank you everyone so much for attending. We look forward to seeing you at future IPN events and next year for PsychedelX 2025, our 5th annual conference. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic weekend.